So hey guys, I'm Dan McCollum. Hi. This is actually an exception because I actually have a conflict to report. We're talking about educational stuff today and like what online resources are available. I actually do have a minor conflict in that I'm recording for EMRAP. Unintentionally, it looks like they're paying me money for it, which will go straight to charity. But I don't like to educate for money. I like to do it for free. But there may be a small amount of money that I'm getting from that if they publish what I've recorded. So the outline, I want to introduce you to PhOMed. Some of y'all may be familiar with PhOMed, free open access medication. Some of you may have never heard of this term before. That's okay. I want to talk about online resources such as podcasts, iTunes, how to use Feedly and RSS feeders. Some of y'all may have received a prior email from me about how to use this. It's really, really helpful to keep your medical blogs in order. Also, how to read journals using electronic publications as opposed to killing a bunch of trees and the very, very big headache of trying to track down paper journals, which is a nightmare. And then also how to use Twitter to get education. And then what paid resources are available for those of you that are residents with way too much money, or more likely, once you're out and you actually can afford a little bit of paid resources so that you can get CME credit, what kind of things are available. So, PhOMed. This is basically the idea that education should be free for medicine, okay? That we're going to make free things, hence the F, that it's going to be open, meaning that you can get it no matter what, okay? Whether you're a poor person that's in a third world country trying to provide care, or if you're someone in Atlanta. This is basically open access. Anyone can get a hold of it. There's no paywalls, okay? That's the big limiting thing. And then meducation, which is a terrible word, but it makes the mnemonic much sweeter. So this was actually came up with over a pint of Guinness, which any movement that starts over a pint of Guinness is okay by me. That's for you, Eric. But the main thing here is you can't charge money, okay? So it has to be free. So I don't want to denigrate paid sources, okay? EMRAP is amazing. It's a great education resource, but it costs several $100s a year once you're out of residency, okay? So that's not a bad thing. It's just not free, which limits the ability for that knowledge to be spread. The PhOMed movement was started in an effort to try to make things more available. So when PhOMed first started, there weren't that many people using it, okay? And if you go back, this was 2012, okay? This wasn't, oh, back in 1987, this thing started and slowly grew. This thing exploded to where from 2012 until now, in just a few years, it went from this obscure thing that only the most hardcore of electronic nerds would know about to something that has basically changed the way that emergency medicine in particular is taught, okay? So this grew up into a conference called the SMACC conference. I strongly encourage you, if you're all able to go to one of these, that you do. It was easily the best conference that I've ever been to. So it's social media and critical care. They've had a couple in Australia. They just had one in Chicago. They're going to Dublin this year. I'm going to Dublin. If anyone is interested in going, please let me know. This is an absolutely fantastic opportunity to meet some of the gods of emergency medicine. And if you ask any of the leading thought leaders in emergency medicine, what is the best conference? The majority of them will tell you this, at least from a pure educational standpoint. There are other places that have better networking, so if you need a job, you should probably go to ACEP because all the recruiters are there and you can talk to them. If you're wanting to meet Mel Herbert, you should probably go to Essentials. but this is really the best conference around. So let's talk about podcasts, okay? Because you're not here to hear me ramble on about conferences. You want to know about what kind of things are available. So podcasts, for those of you who are under the age of 30, I apologize for this slide, but podcasts are basically a combination of iPod with broadcast, okay? So basically it's the idea that normally with talk radio, you have to listen to whatever they're talking about. And it may or may not be something that you care about at all, okay? So if you listen to NPR, most of the time they're talking about things that you could care less about. And then occasionally Radiolab comes on and it's awesome. So podcasts basically let you short circuit that to where you can get that information whenever it works for you and not the other way around. Because why not? It's recorded already. So you want to go for a jog, you can listen to a lecture on CHF because that's what you wanted. Are you already good at CHF? Don't listen to that lecture. You need to listen to that thing that you're terrible at. And that's one of the great things about this is it lets you multitask. I rarely am capable of driving in the car now in silence because you can just listen to podcasts and constantly get a lecture without spending other time that would have been used for something else. so that you can stay sane and keep a life going. Almost all podcasts that are relevant for this are free through iTunes. We'll mention specifically the ones that are paid. So iTunes is just one way to get podcasts, okay? Of course, I don't get any money from Apple. They're a vaguely evil corporation, I'm sorry. But they have the best podcatcher software out there because this is the industry leader, okay? There are other ones that are available. Don't use them. iTunes is just better because that's where everyone is. And if you try to use another one, there will be some podcasts, because these are mostly still small podcasts on the order of thousands of subscribers, not tens of thousands of subscribers. So they won't be available if you try to use some other things. It does work for Android just fine. So you may not have noticed this before, but there is a little podcast button on the top of iTunes. Just select it, go to the iTunes store, and search. So that was mostly for people that don't know how to use iTunes. I apologize for you guys. So let's talk about the key podcasts that I think that everyone should at least be aware of, okay? And I'm going to emphasize that every one of these podcasts is not for everyone, and I want to point out the strengths and weaknesses of each. So MCRIT is perhaps the most famous of the PhomEd podcasts. It costs nothing at all unless you want CME, in which case it's very affordable. This is basically bleeding edge critical care. And the thought behind it is that geography should not determine your care. So if they're doing something that's effective in the ICU, you should be doing it in the ER. If they're doing something in the ER that's effective, why aren't we doing this pre-hospital? So wherever it is that the patient is physically located, you should never say, oh, we can't do dialysis because we're in X location, unless you have a really compelling reason. Why can't we do dialysis downstairs if we need to? So that doesn't change the fact that, yes, absolutely, people should go to the ICU when possible. But if something makes sense in one part of the hospital, it should probably make sense everywhere in the hospital. And so that's really the underlying ethos of this. The problem with this podcast is that it is bleeding edge. Okay? So as soon as there is a case report of some pre-hospital team using Reboa to stop someone exsanguinating from their leg, Scott Weingart wants to talk about it. And that is utterly irrelevant to your regular community doc. They are so far from being able to do Reboa that this is more, oh, in 10 years we might be doing this, than, oh, next shift, I'm going to go do that thing. Do not do that. Now, some of the topics actually are surprisingly relevant. Some of his discussions of airway management and so forth, very relevant. You could go the next shift. But most of his stuff is mainly applying to if you're in a large tertiary center, especially a trauma center. Otherwise, I don't think this really helps you that much if you're going to go moonlight at Trinity. It's just too high end. And some of the stuff that he talks about is a little too bleeding edge in that it's not really core material. So I actually actively discourage people, especially early in residency, from listening to this too much. It's okay every now and then if you're really fascinated by it. That's okay. But do not make this one of your core things that you're listening to if you're an intern or a med student. It's fun, it's exciting, it's cool. Everyone likes talking about these topics. But this is not really what you need. ERcast is a great podcast. Rob Orman is one of the best speakers out there. It's very entertaining. These are a little bit lighter. And the thing that I like about this is it's community-oriented. So whatever they're talking about on ERcast is actually highly relevant to general practice settings. Not just, oh, I'm at this huge hospital with 95 specialists, but, oh, I'm actually at Trinity and I want to know, what do you do with these folks with kidney stones or whatever? This will tell you. And it's really fantastic. Skeptic's Guide to Emergency Medicine is a little bit nerdier. If you like discussions of resources and journals and how to analyze articles, this is probably the best single resource for you. If you want to know how do you read an article and figure out whether this means something to you, should you apply this or not, this podcast will teach you how to do it. Okay? So a lot of folks say, hey, I read these journal articles and I don't know how to poke holes in them the way other folks do. Some of that's from practice. You read enough journal articles, you figure out, oh, this wasn't a randomized controlled trial at all. It was unblinded. All these flaws that we see. This will teach you how to do that so that later in life, when you actually see a journal article, there's no morning conference to talk about it, you can appropriately analyze it. And it does a fantastic job of that. It is a little more heavy on evidence-based medicine skills and statistics and some other things, but it's still very, very relevant for even just your regular doc. And at the end of every episode, when they take the journal article, they do a great job of getting that fine point of, what should I do my next shift when this comes in? Should I take what this journal article is telling me and use it, or is it not ready for prime time? And they do a very good job of that. one of the beauties of SMACC, it being a FOAMed institution, all the lectures that they record go up for free. So there are, I think, over 100 lectures that are available from the last 2 years at SMACC, and they're just now posting the ones from this past SMACC in Chicago. These are absolutely fantastic lectures. The problem with them is that they come from a wide variety of sources. So you're going to have an anesthesiologist talking to you. You're going to have ICU docs. You're going to have ER folks. There's just all these different folks that come from all different walks of life and also international. So you're going to find out what the Australians do, what the British people, the Brits, those people over there that speak the Queen's English, what they do. That's a good and bad thing because listening to anesthesiologists talk about the airway is important, okay? But it doesn't necessarily change what you do the next time you've got the drunk guy that's not fasted, that's vomiting everywhere, that you need to intubate after a trauma. It is different, but these guys deal with airway all the time. So it makes sense to listen to them. You just have to make sure that it applies to your setting. These are some of the best talks. They're very groundbreaking and cutting edge, and so some of it's not that applicable to your next shift. But this will change the way that you think. They're kind of the TED Talks of medicine. The Ultrasound Podcast is absolutely fantastic. Mike and Matt are hilarious, and they're very entertaining. So after I left residency, I was practicing for the most part for the first 2 years out in places that didn't have ultrasound. And my skills got a lot rustier because I didn't have easy access to an ultrasound machine. And sometimes I had to kind of pretend like I wasn't using an ultrasound and not chart it, but I wasn't being watched. And so residency is great because you can pull Eric Zavalos or Matt Lyon over and say, hey, look, is this the gallbladder? Am I actually seeing the triad here? And they can tell you, oh, no, you're actually incredibly off. That's actually the left kidney. I don't know what you're doing. And they can actually guide you that way and actually make it better, okay? When you're practicing by yourself, there will be new ultrasound modalities that come out. And so whenever that next big thing comes out, someone's talking about TEE for ruling out dissection or something like that, and you want to learn how to do it 10 years from now, this is going to be the way that you're probably going to learn how to do it. It's either that or go to incredibly expensive conferences. And by incredibly expensive, some of these ultrasound conferences cost many thousands of dollars. So that's both an emphasis to take advantage of the skills that you have here because you've got world-class ultrasound leaders that know what they're doing. So if you want to learn how to do some crazy thing, how to get really good at right heart echo or something like that, take advantage of it now while it's free. Don't wait until you're out and then say, oh, I want to learn how to do really cutting-edge echocardiography. Well, great. That's going to cost you $5,000, a plane ticket, and a week of your life to go do that. Versus right now, you can do that for free. So why not? This podcast is absolutely fantastic. It has a weird mix of very, very relevant and crazy ahead of the curve stuff. I mean, they talk about ultrasound for scaphoid fractures and then ultrasound-guided cricothyrotomies and a lot of other stuff that, frankly, to me is just weird. But it's very entertaining, and the mix is great. EM Basic is perhaps the most underrated podcast of all of them. It's very dry. It's not very fun, but this covers the core topics like nothing else, okay? You will not listen to this and be entertained. I'm sorry, you just won't. It's the absolute opposite of MCRIT. But I know of no better single resource that's an audio form that I would encourage interns and medical students to listen to. It's absolutely fantastic, okay? I learned a great deal listening to every one of these, and it was murder for me to listen to all of these. It really was. There's like 70 of these. I was going nuts because they explain it. They say, oh, well, you should get a CBC in this patient because. And after a while, you're just like, I can't do this. But if you break it up, I promise you'll get so much. And I learned a ton from this. And I listened to these not that long ago. This was maybe 6 months or so ago. And I listened to every one of them, and I learned a lot from those. And these are core topics, but very evidence-based, very, very relevant. And if you ever find something that you feel rusty on, you realize that you saw a syncopal patient, and you're like, I don't actually know who I should admit with syncope. I've got no clue. There is an EM Basic for that. And they're basically building an audio textbook. Many of the residents here are actually writing up outlines so that we can record and submit for this. And so you may actually hear some of your colleagues in coming months once we lay down the audio for that. PEM ED is perhaps the best pediatric-based podcast. Sloas is hilarious and not at all mentally stable, but a really, really good guy. And really breaks down a lot of barriers, shows cutting-edge PED stuff. When you leave here, this is another opportunity. When you get out in the community, you're not going to have awesome folks like Lane and Tucker that can walk you through how to take care of sick kids. You're mostly going to be floating out there by yourself with the kids. And so keeping up to date, because pediatrics does have a fair bit of change over time, is really, really important. And so this is a good way to do it. So this is the list of every podcast I listen to, every episode of. It is too long for most of you. You pretty much don't want to listen to all these. I want you to pick the ones that are your favorite. The ones that I think are probably relevant where everyone should at least try an episode of are MCRIT, SGEM, SMACC, and EM Basic. Every person in this room should listen to one of those, okay, to see if you like it. It may be that you tried EM Basic and you're like, I can't do this. I'm done with Steve Carroll. That's okay. That's okay. But you should try it. So let's talk about the Feedly app. So Feedly is just, in my opinion, the best RSS feeder. So RSS basically is a way for information to be pushed to you as opposed to you pulling it. So if you have a bunch of websites that you like to visit, okay, say that you want to, every day you go and you check ESPN, Wall Street Journal, and then, I don't know, TMZ, because you can't handle not knowing what T Swift was up to last night. And every day you go to those sites. Well, that's fine. Every morning you can open up tabs for each of those and see what's going on. But you're not going to be told when something new happens on one of those sites. An RSS feeder pushes that information to you. So you sign up for those sites, and then it pushes to you. So you were gone visiting someone for a couple days over a weekend, and you didn't check the internet. This is the quickest way to actually have all that information pushed to you in a readable format. Okay? What's really great for this is that some days you're too busy to read a bunch of medical articles, or you don't have the energy to actually absorb it. You're just spent, you just had a long, tough shift. Going home and trying to study is probably not the optimum time for that, okay? So what do? You use Feedly. It pushes all the articles of the blogs that you want to follow, and then you can read them when you get to it. So a week from then, when you have a day off and you've got some time, you've got some energy, and you've got a cup of coffee, and you want to do it, you can, okay? So Feedly is kind of the iTunes of the RSS world. There are other RSS feeders. I just think this is the best one. And you can use it on Android, computer, whatever. So you basically download Feedly onto your device of your choosing, and you click on the plus Feedly when you want to follow something. It's very similar to following podcasts. It's really simple. And you can make separate folders. So if you want your T-Swift dedicated folder to have all of T-Swift all the time so you can stay up to date, I know I do, then you can do that and then have your emergency medicine stuff and so forth. So the single best blog that is in existence is Life in the Fast Lane. I didn't say medical blog. I just think it's the best blog. It's incredible. If you did nothing else from this talk other than go to Life in the Fast Lane, I have succeeded this hour. Okay? This is the heart of FOAMed. It will plug you into all the other stuff. If you play around on this site, you can't help but find all the other stuff that I found. And this is how I found most of it. Okay? So if they're talking about something that's awesome, you can click on it, go to that site. So there are literally hundreds of people making FOAMed, and it all eventually filters through here. And they actually do weekly reviews. So if you don't want to listen to 22 podcasts, because I don't really recommend you do that, go to Life in the Fast Lane, and they will tell you the best episodes. Because honestly, some of those episodes aren't that fun to listen to. But go there. They have wonderful reviews of core topics. They have great cutting-edge stuff. It's very entertaining. It's just great. So Academic Life in Emergency Medicine, ALIEM, is another fantastic site. This one's grown a lot in the last couple of years. The title's a little bit misleading because it's not that academic focused, but there's a lot of things here that I'd like to point out for lifestyle stuff. All the time we talk about things like aortic dissection and how to treat toxicology cases, and we don't ever talk about how do you stay sane and actually do this for a living. This site actually has a great deal about how to keep yourself healthy. How do you exercise? How do you eat on shift? How do you use time management? Things like that. They're actually really, really good, and something that until they started doing it, no one was talking about. So how do you swap your night cycle to do a night shift? How do you eat while on a busy shift? How do you balance life and work? It's really, really good stuff. So if you're finding yourself stressed, there's probably some good tips on this site. There's also a lot of great core educational components as well for this, and so is a must-read, I think. EM Lit of Note is probably the most condensed analysis of relevant literature that I'm aware of. Most of the time, Ryan Radecki is taking articles that are 10 to 20 pages long, and in about 3 or 4 paragraphs, either supporting what they're saying or utterly ripping them apart. It is an absolutely fantastic way. If you're into the SGEM, you like evidence-based medicine, you want to know how to read an article, Ryan Radecki's blog will show you how to do it. It posts frequently, and a lot of the things that just get accepted as a acceptable finding in a journal article, he really rips apart and shows you how to analyze things. It's a little bit less systematic than the SGEM, but I rarely strongly disagree with what he's writing. Boring EM is another poorly named blog because it's not at all boring. It was founded because most of what we deal with, probably 80 to 90% of the cases we have, are not remotely critically ill. And many of the patients that you see are going to be more in the sprained ankle than amputated ankle category. Okay? That's part of practice. And unfortunately, we don't spend a lot of time talking about sore throats compared to how much time we spend talking about airways. Almost every shift, I deal with someone that's got a cough, runny nose, things like that. And we never talk about it. However, every shift, I don't intubate 4 people and admit 5 to the ICU, and that's all we talk about because that's fun, it's exciting, it's very EM crit based. This is kind of in some ways the opposite of that because it's talking a lot about the more mundane things. How do you take care of someone with knee pain? What's the actual workup look like? And it's surprisingly entertaining for such boring topics because they really get down to the evidence base. And oddly enough, they have some cutting edge discussions of these more mundane topics, making it, oddly enough, not exactly core content. Dr. Smith's ECG blog is a great place to go if you have too much pride. So every time I go on this, they'll start with a case and they'll show you the EKG and I look at it and say, oh, that looks pretty good. And then at the end, I'm like, oh, this is clearly an MI. Great. So if you ever want to get humbled, go to this blog. I can't emphasize enough, this is not how you learn to read EKGs. If you don't know the difference between the types of bundle branch blocks, do not go here. You will get crushed. I know that I did. It is brutal because this guy is reading EKGs on a level that no one else is. He literally wrote a textbook on the stuff. It's fantastic. But it will polish you once you pass that initial threshold. If you want to get good at that initial bit, read the books by Mathieu. So Mathieu's got 3 textbooks based on EKGs. One's an actual textbook. The other 2 are just cases. There are much better ways for you to learn how to read EKGs than following Dr. Smith. Once you've digested that and actually are reasonably okay with it, go here and then get stomped because that's pretty much what's going to happen. It's brutal, but very, very entertaining. So these are the 22 blogs that are on my RSS feed. I didn't mean for that to be the same number as the podcast, but it worked out that way. The ones that I would say everyone in this room should at least try once would be Academic Life and Emergency Medicine, EM Lit of Note, and Life in the Fast Lane, with particular emphasis on that last one. If you did nothing else other than listen to that, you would be doing great and you would be far ahead of the curve. So let's talk about some apps. Okay, I didn't actually add that many apps here because I think that most apps aren't useful on a day-to-day basis. So I only did a couple. The first is Epocrates. It's a freemium service, meaning that you can upgrade to something more, but the free app serves me just fine. This is what I use to look up drugs, and it's quite good. The basic app is pretty solid and will tell you a little bit about dosing. For the most part, reasonably up to date. The frustrating thing is that it often has very wide ranges. So if you look up how to treat cellulitis, it'll say something like trimethoprim sulfamethoxazole, give between 1 and 4 tabs of that twice a day. And you're like, well, that's not really helpful. But that often happens where they have a wide range with it, but it will make sure that you're not doing something crazy, and it's free. The other app that I want to talk about is the Read app. It's by qxmd, which I think is trying to do other apps. This is the only one of their apps that I use. This is how I read journals, okay? I hate paper journals because they just get lost. You got to carry them around. It's no good. This allows you to read it, preferably through an iPad or tablet type device, but you can also do this through your phone if you want. But it allows you to read the articles themselves. So here's where you go down the rabbit hole. You have to decide how many journals you're going to read because there's a finite number of hours in the day, okay? I'm going to talk in a minute about which journals I think are most relevant for different folks before we go further. I read 30 journals, And it's terrible. You're going to spend 10 to 20 hours a week reading journals. And that is a lot. And I'm not recommending that for most. And we're going to talk more about this later. The ones that I would recommend are mostly Annals of Emergency Medicine, and then a few of the core ones, because many articles that are actually highly relevant to us actually don't get published in emergency medicine journals, but things like the New England Journal. Okay? So just because it doesn't have the word emergency in the title, frustratingly, that's also part of our specialty. And this is really, really frustrating. Don't worry about writing these down. I'm going to try to send out the slide set to everyone later if they want it. So, and then last, you got Twitter and PhomEd. Now, Twitter is another way that you can go down the rabbit hole of spending your entire life doing nothing but medical stuff. The PhomEd movement took off with a hashtag of hashtag PhomEd. Do not put hashtag foam in, because there's a type of party called foam parties. Some of you guys have uncomfortably knowing grins on your faces, where basically a bunch of young people get mostly undressed and hop around in bubbles in a club. And do not put that into your Twitter account unless that's what you want to do. I mean, that's fine. It's not judging you, but there will be a lot less about medical literature and a lot more about other things. So make sure that you put in PhomEd to find it. What this lets you do is it lets you follow people on Twitter as they post things. The problem I have with it is Twitter's always on, so it's constantly pushing things your way, and you will get flooded. If you only follow 10 or 20 people, you will have potentially hundreds of tweets a day that you have to filter through. And much of it will actually be covering other stuff. So it'll actually cover things that are related to blog posts, podcasts, journal articles, and so forth. So if you stay up to date on that other stuff, you largely don't have to follow this. But if that's how you like to do it, if you like to get little bite-sized bits of information, it's fine. The problem is, in 140 some odd characters, you can't convey a lot of knowledge. So it's mostly, here's a link to this journal article, read it and weep. And that's frustrating because it kicks you out of the app. You have to read the article and then come back. It's very inefficient. And so I don't really like Twitter for that. But if it suits you, go for it. So let's talk a little bit about paid content. Paid resources are not necessarily better just because you're getting paid for it. The key to it, though, is once you get out, right now you don't have to worry about CME. You're already in residency. It doesn't matter at all. When you get out, if you're not an academic shop, CME is going to be a big part of how you get credit for all the stuff that you're doing. I can't stand the CME system. It's corrupt. It's got tons of flaws. But it's the reality for years to come is that you're going to have to record CME credits. And a lot of the paid resources will actually do it. They actually make it very onerous for free resources to get CME, and it costs a lot of money to get credit. So very few of the truly free resources will actually have any CME with you spending no money on it. So if you use paid resources like EMRAP and some other things we're going to talk about, they generally do offer CME credit, which will make it so that you don't have to go to separate conferences, and ironically, it'll end up saving you a lot of money. But just because it's paid doesn't mean it's necessarily better than some of the free stuff. So EMRAP, I think, is the best paid podcast. It's about $400 a year. Make sure before you get out of residency to download every last old episode of EMRAP. There's like 10 years of them. Listen to them all. They're fantastic. Even the old ones are actually quite relevant because it turns out diltiazem has been working very well for a long time. So a lot of this stuff is not necessarily new. There's only so many hours each month. But so listen to the old ones. And it's kind of humorous to hear young Mel Herbert as opposed to now. But it's very, very polished. It's actually, the audio quality has gotten better and better over time. Some of the older ones are much more humble, but is a great resource. UpToDate is something I have a love-hate relationship with. It is incredibly expensive. It's $500 a year for you to have it. That's $500 a year. That is a lot of money for what it's offering. And the quality of the articles is very hit and miss. There is a current cardiology attending that was approached while he was a fellow to write a major topic for UpToDate covering cardiology. So what that tells me is that some of the authors truly are experts, and you look at their name and you know them from the literature and you're like, oh, this guy knows what he's talking about. Some of them are frankly not. So sometimes they're having people, because they're cheaper, they're paying fellows to write some of these articles, and they're just not right. Okay? I can't tell you whether the AFib article is actually that good because I don't know enough about AFib to really comment on it. But I've looked at enough of the emergency medicine articles to say that there's a significant number of them that have very crazy recommendations that I heartily disagree with, and they have very, very poor citations for why they're making those recommendations. So is it better than nothing if someone comes in with an obscure neurologic disorder and they're like, I don't know how to treat dermatomyositis, what should I do? It's great because you're going from nothing to something at least, and that's much more reasonable. okay? If you're thinking that this is going to bail you out from core topics, like I don't know how to treat AFib, I don't think that that's a good idea. But this is a great resource to have if you don't have any other resource, because it at least gets you that starting point. Because most of the time the initial recommendations are reasonable, but they're not always best. EM Abstracts is another thing that's free during residency. I didn't know about this until I think I was a third-year resident, but unless they've changed it, you can actually get all these episodes free, including the old ones. The old ones are actually better. Okay, oldies are better for this one because Jerry Hoffman did most of the old ones. And Jerry Hoffman is one of the best speakers to listen to learn how to look at articles. They basically go through numerous articles. I think it often goes 30 or more articles per podcast, and basically dissects them and tells you whether it's clinically relevant or not. And they're covering a huge number of journals. They cover many hundreds of journals when they're looking for these articles, and it's fantastic. It's very entertaining if you're into evidence-based medicine, but is a very, very dense podcast. Okay, but make sure that you download all of these before you leave residency because it's simply fantastic, and it's something that's worthwhile even when you get out. So the next thing we're going to say is there's not one plan of how you educate yourself. And that's one of the things that's frustrating as an adult learner. When we take people and we put them in kindergarten and we send them through high school, there's a rough idea that everyone's going to learn most of the same and that second graders are more or less equivalent to each other in second grade. And it breaks down when you get to adulthood because the people in this room are of a variety of skill sets. They come from different starting points and they have different ways that work for them because you're adults. Okay, you're not 7 anymore. You're not going to tolerate having people read to you. So you have to get better in your own way, okay? So we're going to talk about where you should go kind of on the educational pathway and where you should stop, okay? And I cannot emphasize that enough. It makes very little sense for hardly anyone in this room to read 30 journals a month. It doesn't. Don't do it unless that makes sense for you, okay? This is not starting at terrible and then going down to good. This is where does it work for you? So, and this is one of the hardest things to learn. You don't get extra credit for covering more material, okay? You don't get extra credit for covering more material. There is nobody that's going to give you a report card with a gold star and said, oh, you did a really terrible job on last shift, but man, you read a lot of journal articles. That's not happening. No one is going to be watching you very closely when you leave residency to know whether you suck or you're awesome. They just aren't. And that's scary. Because you probably talked to some people on the phone that were physicians and accepted a transfer, and you thought, my goodness, this person has no idea what they're talking about. And that is very, very easy to do. It is shockingly easy to do. To basically leave residency, do really low-yield CME stuff, never open a textbook again, never listen to a lecture, and then just kind of skate by and hope you passed your reapproval for your board exam. And that happens. That's really, really common, okay? So don't think that anyone's watching you. You don't get credit for this stuff. If it doesn't work for you, if you're cracking open a textbook and you're staring at it and you got nothing out of spending 2 hours trying to read Rosen's, stop. What are you doing? Like, I don't care whether you read Rosen's or listened to it in audio format. I could care less. Don't tell me. If you know what you're talking about, great. If you don't, that's a problem. But you don't get credit for, I spent 20 hours uselessly beating my head against a wall with a textbook nearby. No, you didn't get any credit for that. You just wasted your weekend. Sucks to be you. So this is really, really frustrating, but you're not getting credit for this, okay? However it is that you learn is what makes sense. If you find that podcast and jogging works for you, great. If you actually like textbooks and you curl up with a cup of coffee and want to read them, great. That's fine. Whatever works for you as long as you learn what you need to know to help people. So let's talk about basketball, okay, as a relevant discussion of moving from education to another metaphor for what works, okay? So I love basketball, and I'm pretty terrible at it, okay? I enjoy playing it, but I know that I'm not going to be the next LeBron, okay? I'm not, okay? I enjoy, but I can't dunk. I can barely leave the ground when I jump, but I have a great time, okay? But I get that. I don't pretend like I'm going to be the next LeBron. I'm not in the gym for 40 hours a week trying to train to be the next LeBron. That doesn't make any sense for me because my level of basketball skill is basically go out there and have some fun, which is fine. So I'm not lifting weights focused on getting better at basketball. I'm going out there and having a good time. So ask yourself, are you LeBron or are you LaRavia? And that's fine, okay? That's fine. And I really wish Lee was here for that. That's disappointing. But you have to know what your goal is, okay, to know if what you're doing makes sense. It makes LeBron a better player by doing lots of basketball drills. I am not doing basketball drills. I'm just not. I'd rather go out there and play pickup games, and that's fine for me. Am I going to get better as quickly as if I spent 20 hours a week doing drills? No, but that's okay for me. So new learners, okay, when you're first starting to play the game, okay, and I don't mean any denigration by saying that you're a new learner, you're just new to emergency medicine. So this is medical students and interns, okay? You are just learning how to cover topics in emergency medicine. You're just now walking into that room and saying, oh, this guy's got chest pain, what should I do? So what kind of things make sense for that, okay? So textbooks are kind of a dying relic that are still important, okay? Because textbooks have that core knowledge, usually in a very dry, difficult to digest format, but it will get you from nothing to that first little bit fairly quickly. The best book for this, we'll cover in a second, that is called Baby Tent and Alley or Just the Facts. EM Basic is a fantastic format if you want to get an audio format as opposed to a book format, which I really can't give enough plugs for that. And a very important thing is that you don't know what you don't know yet. So the different interns are going to have different strengths. Maybe you're awesome with trauma because either you liked it before or it just clicks for you, but you don't know anything about cardiology. That's okay. That's part of being a med student or an intern. But you're not going to know that you don't know that until you take some questions and actually get feedback that, oh, I know nothing about OBGYN at all. And until you go through those Q banks to find that out, you're going to be kind of floundering. And ironically, that's the stuff that you have to focus on, but it's the stuff that you least want to learn. Because if you're terrible at something, you tend not to go back to that well and be reminded, oh my gosh, I have no idea what to do with placenta previa. I just don't know. And you're going to avoid that because it's uncomfortable to talk about things that you don't know. And you're going to go back, oh, I know everything there is to know about liver lacerations. You don't, but you think you do. And it feels comfortable to talk about that because that's your wheelhouse. You like that. Nobody likes working out the muscles in the gym that they suck at. So they do lots and lots of bicep curls and look huge, and they can't do a squat to save their life. And that's one of those true things about humans. And I really recommend against running before you can walk. So avoid things like MCRIT. If you want to listen to the occasional MCRIT episode, that's fine. But be very, very careful if, as an intern, you say, Scott Weingart said, be really careful. Because it's frankly, 9 times out of 10, too advanced. You need to just do the basic stuff right, and then you can move on to the advanced. So this is the book that I recommend that every med student intern get. It's pretty cheap. It's less than $70 new on Amazon. It basically condenses the huge tent and alley down into 500-600 pages or so. It's about a fifth of the text with 90% of what you need to actually know. There's less background stuff like pathophys and histology and stuff like that you're going to get in the full textbook, but I largely don't care about that stuff. And so this is a great way to catch up to get that core, what do I do for someone with AFib, kind of questions that you frankly don't know at first. So there's an effect called the Dunning-Kruger Effect, and since I'm being recorded, I'll be careful about which consultants are most guilty of this. But there's a concept of if you don't know what you're talking about, you're more confident in what you're talking about. And that's not fair, but it's true. So people that have the least amount of training in something often act like they know everything in the world about it. And if you actually ask an expert about something, they'll often say, well, it depends, or we don't actually know the answer to that question. They're very humble about it, even though they're the expert on it. If you listen to Klein talk about PE, all the time he's saying, look, we don't actually have a study to do this versus that, but I believe it's this. If you ask someone that is just a cocky little jerk that's read one article on PE, he'd be like, I am certain that this drug is the best. And they're wrong, okay? So you'll run into this a lot, especially with junior consultants, because they think they know everything in the world, and it turns out they don't. And that's okay. We're all learners. But that overconfidence is really, really dangerous in medicine. So let's talk about advanced residents. So as you go into second year and third year and you're kind of getting more and more, like you can play the game now, okay? Maybe you're moonlighting, maybe you're not. That's okay. Now you got to start establishing the patterns for later in life, okay? So you're going to start advancing to more advanced podcasts. You're going to start covering more cutting-edge topics. It's fine now for you to work some things like EMCRIT into your regular listening schedule. But for the most part, I think the important thing here is to establish what you're going to do the rest of your life. Okay? If you're not reading any blogs, not listening to any podcasts while you're a third-year resident, I can promise you when you get out and you have more free time, you're not magically going to start doing all these things. You won't. You'll continue to study just as much as you are as a third year, which may not be a lot for some of you because you're really smart little jerks. But you're not going to do much more. In fact, really, you're just going to have a lot more free time and 5 times as much pay, and then gradually drift into being that terrible doctor, and you're going to pick up the phone and call us, and we're going to be like, man, I can't believe I trained that guy because he's an absolute tool bag that doesn't know how to take care of AFib now. And we're going to say that over the phone, and it's going to be a recorded line, and it's going to be terrible. So don't do that to me in 10 years, okay? Keep studying. So this is where you can start building up more things to establish those patterns. Annals of Emergency Medicine, I actually don't like interns reading a lot of this because I don't think the primary literature is really where you should be as an intern and as an advanced medical student. I think that it's really, you should start learning how to properly read the literature later in residency once you know what you're talking about so that you can accept whether this makes any sense or not. So Annals is the premier journal in emergency medicine. Like I said before, some major articles are actually published in general journals such as the New England Journal and not in emergency medicine-based journals. But Annals is a core journal that comes with ACEP membership. So it's something you have access to, and I think that every ER physician should probably at least crack open Annals as it comes out. If something comes from Australia, it's probably legit in the emergency medicine world. EMA, or Emergency Medicine Australasia, is actually one of my absolute favorite journals. They're very clinically relevant and excellent, even though many people haven't heard about it. And academic emergency medicine is surprisingly good as well. Those are all things that would be reasonable for advanced residents to do. So now let's say that you got out, right? You're done with residency, and now you're just practicing, okay? And you're not trying to be an academic superstar. You're just wanting to be a decent doc, which is what most of our residents go on to do. There is absolutely no shame in this. Let me emphasize that. It is okay to just, quote unquote, just be a good emergency medicine doctor. That's fine. That's what we train here, okay? We're not trying to make the next researcher or the next academic superstar. We're trying to make good doctors that see people and do medicine. You know, it's not radical. So this is where you start having a little bit of money to where you can afford some of those paid resources. Your free EMWrap subscription goes away, and so now you have to pay for it, but you can afford it because you're getting paid a lot more per hour for what you're doing. So EMWrap, I think continuing life in the fast lane is important, reading Annals of Emergency Medicine, and then consider some paid practice updates. So there are some excellent resources for a few $100 a year that you can pay for, and people condense it for you so that you don't have to go and hunt down all these articles yourself, which once you get out, your time is going to be worth more than your money. So it's actually a very good investment to save 20 hours of finding journal articles and pay someone else $400 a year to do it because you're making a lot more than $20 an hour then. And you weren't during residency, but now you are. And so it makes more sense to have someone else condense that for you. So, and I think that this is more about running the marathon than sprinting because this is how the rest of your career will be for most of you. And that's a good thing, okay? So just keep up with what you're doing. If you're listening to EMWrap every month, that's great. You're going to be ahead of 80% of the folks that are out there in the community by just spending a few hours a month listening to EMWrap. And that's really frustrating. EM Practice is about $350 a year. It's kind of like the written version of EMWrap, but less entertaining. I don't actually subscribe to this because I'm reading many of the primary stuff anyway myself, but it condenses some of that information down, and so EB medicine is a good thing to look into. There's something called the Pareto Principle, where 80% of what you get comes from 20% of what causes it, okay? So what this means is that if you do 20% of the studying that a nut like myself does, you will get 80% of the benefit. So just showing up and doing a little bit, listening to EMWrap and going to Life in the Fast Lane and spending just a few hours a month keeping up to date will make you better. It will get you 80% of the results as if you just dedicated every minute of your free time towards doing stuff, okay? And this is a humbling thing because it doesn't seem fair to spend an extra 100 hours a month doing educational activities and only get a little bit better, but this is the reality. And the problem with those folks on the other end of the phone that don't know what they're talking about is that they're basically getting very close to 0 hours a month of continuing to stay fresh. And so just a few hours a month would actually really keep you up to date and prevent you from harming a lot of folks. So then there's what I consider the specialist. So we encourage niches here where we really want you to focus in on something that's your thing, okay? So, for example, Mike Caudell is very up to date on a lot of the wilderness medicine stuff. There's not a lot of those articles that I think that are going to escape him, okay? I know Hartman Gross keeps up to date with stroke literature, and that doesn't mean that you have to take the whole of medical literature and read all of it to develop your niche, because most likely, for most people, they're going to have that thing that they're really good at, and then they're just going to be a core person on top of that, and that's okay. So Schwartz knows way more about the airway than I will ever know, and he's very up to date on those things. I may read more things on other topics than him, but that's his niche. And it's actually a very healthy thing to do without a lot of time, because it turns out that you can read a lot for one narrow thing and read all the relevant stroke articles or all the relevant airway articles in a relatively short amount of time, and that be your thing that you're great at. And this is a wonderful thing to do for a career in academia. It's also a great thing to keep you interested even if you're just in the community, because you'll become the ultrasound guy for your group, or you'll become the stroke guy for your group, and that's great. So basically, you're just going to narrow it down to one area of mastery and let some of the other stuff go. You're not going to stay up to date on everything in a brutally, literature total view, but you're going to be fine. You're going to be the core attending plus that little niche. And I think this is a great thing for many people to strive for. Okay, I think that that's a good thing to do. And then there's what I call the path to madness, which I do not recommend. Okay, and this is what I'm spiraling down, and I really want to emphasize that this is not for everybody. But basically, if you want to digest the literature yourself, you have to read all the other journals where this stuff gets published. And it's terrible, okay? I can't tell you how many garbage anesthesia articles I've had to go through that were based on rat models and stuff like that. It sucks your life dry if that's not what you want to do, okay? So please don't think that we went from terrible to best. It's not. It's just different, okay? There might be one other person in this room that would even remotely consider doing this, and that's okay. Hopefully no one else will make this mistake. Don't do it. So you have to balance life and medicine, okay? You got to spend some time with your family. You got to go do the things that you enjoy doing, okay? Spending hundreds of hours a year reading journal articles from specialties that you aren't even part of is not necessarily a great way to do that, okay? It's okay for me. It's a choice I've made, and I'm enjoying it. But I'm weird, and you're probably not like me, and that's okay, okay? So remember the Pareto Principle, that you're getting 80% of the benefit from doing 20%. Which means every more journal that I add to my reading list, and it keeps growing, much to my shame, is a little bit less than I'm actually getting benefit from. Because at a certain point, you're not really getting much more out of it. When I add my 31st journal, it's not like it's that much better than the 30th, and I'm only going to be a little bitty bit better, okay? I do that because I like education, and that's what I'm dedicating my career and life towards. But that's not for everyone. So please don't think that there's any shame in saying, look, I'm reading 2 journals a month. I listen to a podcast or 2. I go to Life in the Fast Lane. That's wonderful. And you're going to be so far ahead of everyone else by just doing that. Okay? So what is the best way to seem like you know what you're talking about? It's to actually know what you're talking about. So be humble when you're talking to other folks that have read more in that specialty. So when you talk to that difficult consultant, realize that maybe, just maybe, they know more about what you're talking about. Because an easy thing to do is to think that just because you've dipped your toe in their specialty that you know everything about that there is. I don't. And so you have to constantly stay humble and remind yourself, look, this is an electrophysiologist. He knows what he's talking about when he talks about AFib. Okay? Maybe it's right, maybe it's wrong. Not everyone is actually up to date. It's a common error to think that just because you're a cardiology fellow that you're necessarily read that month's cardiology literature. You may not have, okay? But have some humility with what you're doing. So do we have any questions at all before I recap?
I just wanted to give a shout out to White Coat at this time. I have it on my TV. I know it's not part of this kind of educated stuff.
Oh, that's a great point. So Martin points out the White Coat Investor, which is a very good online resource for folks looking at using money. We spend very little time talking about how to manage your finances, which are pretty much hovering around 0 to the heavy, heavy negative during residency. But you will talk to some folks that have been out of residency for 10 years, and then they'll say, oh yeah, I've still got $150,000 in student debt, and those people are crazy. It's very easy to do. It's very easy to spend your whole paycheck, and when you get out of residency, you'll be shocked at what you could spend your money on, And I strongly encourage you not to do that, to plan for retirement and save away and pay off debts and so forth. So that's a great other resource. Any other questions or comments? So to recap, listen to podcasts through iTunes. I strongly recommend EM Basic when you're starting, and then you can add EM Crit later. Use Feedly to follow blogs, particularly Life in the Fast Lane. If you did nothing else other than follow that blog, props. And then Academic Life and Emergency Medicine is also fantastic. Download apps onto your phone. You'll have to find the ones that work for you. I strongly recommend Epocrates, but other things for other folks, and that's fine. And then choose your level of learning. Find out what that goal is that you want, okay? And there's, again, no shame at all in just being a solid clinician that just takes care of people. And you can do that for just a few hours a month. It doesn't take that long to get much better because of the Pareto Principle. Thank y'all very much.